The first sign of the attack was a ripple in the void, a distortion that shimmered like heat waves across the vast expanse of space. Commander Virak of the Zevran Armada leaned forward in his command chair, his crimson eyes narrowing as the anomaly unfolded on the main display. The humans were coming. Status report, Virak barked, his voice slicing through the tense atmosphere of the bridge. The crew scrambled to their stations, their clawed hands flying over sleek control panels. The Zevran fleet was the most advanced in the galaxy, its ships armed with technology centuries ahead of anything humanity could muster. This was supposed to be an easy victory, but as the distortion solidified, revealing a squadron of human fighters hurtling toward them, Virak felt an unfamiliar chill prick the back of his neck. The ships were small and angular, their frames bristling with makeshift modifications. Primitive by Zevran standards, yet somehow menacing in their audacity. Incoming fighters, reported Tactical Officer Kryn, her tone laced with disbelief. 18 vessels on approach vector. Speed, 3 times their design specifications. Weapons systems, online and active. Virak's mandibles clicked in irritation. 3 times their design specs? He repeated. How is that possible? Kryn hesitated. Unknown, Commander, she admitted, but their trajectory suggests they're heading straight for us. No evasive maneuvers. No formation adjustments. It's reckless. Virak stared at the display, his claws tightening on the armrests of his chair. Reckless didn't begin to cover it. The humans were flying directly into the heart of the Zevran fleet, a move that was as suicidal as it was bold. Deploy interceptors, Virak ordered. Engage them before they reach our lines. The sleek, triangular forms of Zevran interceptors detached from the flagship, their engines flaring as they accelerated to meet the incoming threat. Virak watched as the two groups converged, his confidence returning. This would be over in minutes, but then the humans opened fire. The first volley of plasma bursts was precise, cutting through the Zevran interceptors with surgical accuracy. The alien pilots had no time to react as their ships disintegrated in explosions of blue and silver light. Virak's eyes widened in shock as the human fighters darted through the wreckage, their movements impossibly fast and fluid. How are they doing this? Kryn demanded, her voice rising in panic. Their ships shouldn't be capable of this level of agility. Virak's claws scraped against the armrests, his mind racing. The humans were known for their ingenuity, their ability to adapt and improvise, but this was beyond anything he had anticipated. These pilots weren't just skilled, they were extraordinary. The flagship shuddered as a human fighter zipped past, its plasma cannons raking the ship's shields. The bridge crew scrambled to stabilize the vessel, their voices a cacophony of frantic reports. Virak's gaze locked on the main display, where the human fighters moved like predators in a feeding frenzy, tearing through the Zevran fleet with ruthless precision. Amplify the signal, Virak commanded. I want to hear their comms. The audio feed crackled to life, filling the bridge with the chaotic chatter of human pilots. Their voices were sharp, focused, and laced with a dark humor that sent a shiver down Virak's spine. Ghost 2, you've got 1 on your 6, a woman's voice called. Copy that, Ghost Lead, came the reply. I see him, let's dance. Virak's mandibles clicked in frustration. These weren't just pilots, they were warriors, their camaraderie and confidence a stark contrast to the cold efficiency of the Zevran forces. They flew not as individuals, but as a single, cohesive unit, their every move synchronized with deadly precision. A male voice broke through the comms, its tone laced with defiance. Remember what we're fighting for, Ghosts. They think we're weak. They think we're easy prey. Let's show them what humans can do. The words sent a ripple of unease through the bridge. Virak's claws dug into the armrests as he realized the truth. These pilots weren't just fighting to win. They were fighting to survive, and that made them the most dangerous enemy the Zevran had ever faced. The battle raged on, the void illuminated by the fiery aftermath of each confrontation. Despite their superior numbers and advanced technology, the Zevran fleet found itself struggling to contain the chaos unleashed by the human pilots. Their tactics were unpredictable, their precision unrelenting. For every human fighter that fell, 2 Zevran ships were reduced to smoldering wreckage. In the flagship's war room, Virak paced like a caged predator, his mind racing to make sense of the unfolding disaster. Kryn monitored the battlefield with growing desperation, her usually steady hands trembling as she relayed updates. Commander, she said, her voice strained, we've lost the outer defense line. The humans are pushing toward the command cluster. If they breach that, they won't. Virak interrupted, his tone sharp. They can't. But even as he spoke, doubt gnawed at him. The humans had already defied every expectation, their relentless assault challenging the very foundation of Zevran military doctrine. They were supposed to be inferior, a fractured, disorganized species unworthy of serious consideration. And yet, here they were, forcing the mighty Zevran armada onto the defensive. Virak turned to the tactical display, his gaze fixed on the glowing indicators representing the human fighters. "Who are these pilots?" he demanded. "Where did they come from?" Kryn hesitated, her mandibles twitching. "We intercepted fragments of their communications," she said. "They call themselves the Ghost Squadron. From what we can gather, they're an elite unit, handpicked, highly trained, and known for unconventional tactics. They're considered legendary among their own kind." "Legends don't win wars," Virak snarled. "Tactics and technology do. Find their leader. If we can eliminate their command, the rest will fall." Kryn nodded, her claws flying over the controls. Within moments, the display zoomed in on a single fighter, its designation flashing in red. "Ghost Lead," she announced. "Pilot ID, Captain Sarah Klein." Virak studied the readout, his expression unreadable. The human pilot's file was sparse, but what little information it contained was enough to give him pause. A decorated combat veteran with a history of insubordination, Klein had been described as both a tactical genius and a reckless maverick. Her psychological profile flagged her as unpredictable, a trait that seemed to define her entire squadron. "Target her," Virak ordered. "Concentrate all fire on Ghost Lead. I want her eliminated." As the flagship's weapon systems recalibrated to focus on Klein's fighter, the Ghost Squadron continued their assault. Klein's voice crackled over the comms, a steady presence amidst the chaos. "Ghosts, form up," she commanded. "We've got their attention, but we're not out of the woods yet. Stay sharp. Stay together." Her squadron responded with unwavering confidence, their voices filled with determination. Virak listened to the exchange, his claws tightening into fists. These humans weren't just skilled, they believed in something, and that belief made them dangerous. The flagship's targeting systems locked onto Klein's fighter, its weapons charging with a high-pitched whine. Virak watched the display, anticipation coiling in his chest. This was it, the moment that would turn the tide of battle. But Klein was faster. Her fighter rolled and banked with impossible agility, dodging the incoming fire with a precision that defied belief. She led the flagship's guns on a wild chase, her maneuvers so erratic that even the advanced targeting algorithms struggled to keep up. "She's toying with us," Kryn muttered, her voice filled with disbelief. "She's drawing our fire away from the others." Virak slammed his fist against the console, his frustration boiling over. "Enough of this," he roared. "Deploy the Marauder drones. Overwhelm her with numbers." The drones, sleek and deadly, swarmed from the flagship's launch bays, their movements coordinated by a hive-mind AI. They converged on Klein's fighter, their weapons blazing. For a moment, it seemed as though the human pilot had finally met her match. But Klein didn't falter. With a burst of speed, she dove straight into the swarm, her plasma cannons shredding the drones in a dazzling display of fire and light. Her squadron followed suit, their synchronized attacks turning the tide once more. The Marauders, designed to be the pinnacle of Zevran engineering, were no match for the raw determination and ingenuity of the Ghosts. On the bridge of the flagship, Virak watched in stunned silence as his fleet continued to fall apart. The humans were winning not through superior firepower, but through sheer force of will. They were everything the Zevran had underestimated: resilient, resourceful, and relentless. As the battle raged on, a chilling realization dawned on Virak. The humans weren't just fighting for survival. They were fighting to prove a point, to show the galaxy that they were not to be underestimated. And in doing so, they were reshaping the very fabric of warfare. Virak's voice, when he finally spoke, was filled with a grudging respect. "Prepare the fleet for retreat," he said. "We can't win this. Not today." Kryn stared at him, her expression one of shock. "Retreat," she echoed. "But, Commander..." "Do it," Virak snapped. "These humans, they're not just pilots. They're something else entirely. And we need to understand what we're dealing with before we engage them again." As the flagship's engines roared to life, signaling the beginning of the Zevran retreat, Virak's gaze remained fixed on the tactical display. The Ghost Squadron, their fighters now reduced to a handful of battered ships, held their formation, their resolve unbroken. For the first time in his career, Virak felt the sting of fear, not for himself, but for what the humans represented. They had flown into the heart of battle and emerged victorious, defying every expectation. And as the Zevran fleet faded into the void, Virak knew one thing with absolute certainty: the humans were just getting started. The aftermath of the battle left the Ghost Squadron battered but unbroken. Captain Sarah Klein's fighter was the last to land on the makeshift carrier that served as their base. As the hangar doors sealed shut, cheers erupted from the remaining crew, their voices filled with relief and triumph. They had done the impossible, they had survived. Sarah climbed out of her cockpit, her flight suit stained with sweat and blood, Her knees nearly buckled as she hit the deck, but she steadied herself, forcing a grim smile for her squadron. They gathered around her, their faces a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. "We did it," said Lieutenant Gregor, his voice hoarse but jubilant. "We sent them running." Sarah nodded, her eyes scanning the faces of her team. They were bruised and battered, but alive. That was more than she could have hoped for. "We held the line," she said, her voice firm, "but this is just the beginning. They'll be back. And next time, they'll come at us harder." The mood in the hangar shifted, the weight of her words settling over the group. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. Sarah knew the Zevran wouldn't take this defeat lightly. They were a prideful species, and their retaliation would be swift and brutal. In the days that followed, the Ghost Squadron worked tirelessly to repair their ships and prepare for the next engagement. Supplies were scarce, and the stress of constant vigilance took its toll. But their resolve never wavered. They had faced the Zevran once and lived to tell the tale. They would be ready to face them again. Meanwhile, aboard the Zevran flagship, Commander Virak convened an emergency council with his advisors. The retreat had shaken the Armada to its core, and the humiliation of their defeat hung heavy in the air. Virak's crimson eyes burned with a mixture of anger and determination as he addressed the room. "The humans are more formidable than we anticipated," he began, his voice cold and measured. "Their pilots are not merely skilled, they are driven. They fight with a ferocity and cunning that defy our expectations. We underestimated them, and we paid the price." One of his advisors, a senior strategist named Zekra, leaned forward, her mandibles clicking thoughtfully. "We must analyze their tactics," she said. "Understand how they were able to outmaneuver us. Their ingenuity is troubling." Virak nodded. "Agreed. We must adapt. The humans have shown us their hand, but they have also revealed their weaknesses. Their ships are inferior, their resources limited. If we exploit those vulnerabilities, we can turn the tide." The council erupted into a flurry of debate, each advisor offering strategies for the next encounter. But as the discussion unfolded, Virak's mind wandered. He couldn't shake the image of the human fighters, their movements impossibly precise, their resolve unyielding. They were unlike any enemy he had faced before. Back on Earth, news of the Ghost Squadron's victory spread like wildfire. For a planet still reeling from the Zevran invasion, it was a beacon of hope. Sarah and her team became instant legends, their names whispered with reverence in the crowded shelters and makeshift command centers. But Sarah didn't care for the adulation. She knew the truth. The battle had been a near-suicidal gamble, and their survival was as much a result of luck as skill. She spent her days reviewing footage of the battle, analyzing every maneuver, every mistake. She couldn't afford to let her guard down. The next time the Zevran came, they wouldn't underestimate humanity, and that made them even more dangerous. As the weeks turned into months, the Ghost Squadron's reputation grew. They became a symbol of humanity's defiance, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming odds, there was always a chance to fight back. But with that reputation came expectations and pressure. Sarah felt it weighing on her shoulders every day. She was a leader now, not just a pilot. Her decisions carried the weight of lives, and the burden of knowing that one wrong move could spell disaster for her team was a constant companion. One evening, as she sat alone in the dimly lit strategy room, she received a transmission from an unexpected source. The image of a Zevran officer flickered to life on the hollow display, his crimson eyes meeting hers with a mix of curiosity and respect. "Captain Sarah Klein," the officer said, his voice smooth and measured. "I am Commander Virak of the Zevran Armada. I believe you and I have unfinished business." Sarah's hand hovered over the console, her instincts screaming at her to terminate the connection. But something about Virak's tone gave her pause. He didn't sound like a man delivering an ultimatum. He sounded intrigued. "You've got guts. I'll give you that," Sarah said, her voice steady. "But if you're here to threaten me, you can save your breath." Virak's mandibles twitched in what might have been a smile. "On the contrary," he said, "I have no interest in threats. I am here to propose an opportunity, a chance to end this conflict before it consumes us both." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "And why should I believe you?" "Because I've seen what you and your pilots are capable of," Virak replied. "And I understand that this war, if it continues, will lead to nothing but ruin for both our peoples. You fight with honor, Captain. I respect that, and I believe we can find another way." The connection crackled, the weight of Virak's words hanging in the air. Sarah leaned back in her chair, her mind racing. The idea of negotiating with the enemy was unthinkable, and yet the alternative was a war they couldn't hope to sustain. "I'll consider it," she said finally. "But know this, Commander. If this is a trap, you won't live to regret it." Virak inclined his head, his expression unreadable. "I would expect nothing less," he said. I await your response. As the transmission ended, Sarah stared at the empty screen, her thoughts a whirlwind of uncertainty. The Zevran were her enemy, merciless, calculating, and relentless. But Virak's words had struck a chord. Was it possible, after everything, to find common ground? Or was this just another ploy, a clever gambit to divide and conquer? She didn't have an answer, but as she gazed out at the stars, the weight of her responsibility heavy on her shoulders, one thing was clear: the fate of humanity, and perhaps the galaxy, rested on her next move. The following days were a blur of strategy sessions and tense deliberations. Sarah kept Virak's proposal to herself, knowing that even entertaining the idea of negotiation would be met with resistance from her squadron and Earth's fractured leadership. Trusting the Zevran was a gamble, one that could cost them everything if it went wrong. But the more she thought about it, the more she couldn't ignore the logic behind Virak's words. The Ghost Squadron had won a battle, but the war was far from over. Their resources were dwindling, their allies scattered. Humanity couldn't survive a prolonged conflict with the Zevran. And if there was even a chance to end the fighting without further bloodshed, wasn't it worth considering? Sarah finally confided in Gregor, her most trusted lieutenant. His reaction was as she expected, a mix of disbelief and anger. "You can't be serious," Gregor said, his voice sharp. "After everything they've done? After everything we've lost? You think we can trust them?" Sarah held his gaze, her expression calm but resolute. "I don't trust them," she admitted, "but I can't ignore the opportunity to stop this war. If there's a way to save lives, our lives, I have to take it." Gregor ran a hand through his hair, his frustration evident. "And what if it's a trap? What if they're just using this to get close enough to wipe us out? Then we'll deal with it," Sarah said firmly. "But sitting here waiting for them to strike again isn't a strategy. It's a death sentence." Reluctantly, Gregor nodded. "Fine," he said, "but I'm coming with you. If this goes south, we're getting out together." Sarah smiled faintly. "I wouldn't have it any other way." The meeting with Virak was arranged under strict secrecy. A neutral location was chosen, a derelict space station drifting in the void between their territories. Sarah and Gregor arrived in a single unarmed shuttle, their tension palpable as they docked and stepped onto the station. Virak was waiting for them, flanked by two Zevran officers. His crimson eyes met Sarah's as she approached, his expression a careful mask of neutrality. "Captain Klein," he said, inclining his head, "you honor me with your presence." Sarah crossed her arms, her posture defensive. "Let's skip the pleasantries," she said. "Why are we here?" Virak gestured to a makeshift table in the center of the room, its surface littered with maps and data. "To discuss a future where neither of our peoples are reduced to ash," he said. "Please sit." The conversation that followed was tense, each side probing the other for weaknesses. Virak outlined his vision of a ceasefire, a temporary truce that would allow both sides to regroup and negotiate a more lasting peace. Sarah countered with demands for reparations and guarantees of humanity's sovereignty. The two leaders clashed repeatedly, their voices rising as they argued over territory, resources, and accountability. But amidst the conflict, there were moments of understanding, glimpses of common ground that hinted at the possibility of reconciliation. By the time the meeting ended, no formal agreement had been reached. But as Sarah and Gregor prepared to leave, Virak spoke words that lingered in her mind. "You are formidable, Captain," he said, "more so than I ever imagined. And for what it's worth, I admire your resolve. Perhaps one day we will find a way to coexist." Sarah didn't respond, her thoughts a whirlwind as she and Gregor returned to their shuttle. The meeting had left her with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear: the war was changing, and so was she. In the weeks that followed, both sides began to shift their strategies. The Zevran attacks grew less frequent, their forces focusing on fortifying their positions rather than launching offensives. The Ghost Squadron continued their missions, but with a renewed focus on protecting civilians and rebuilding what had been destroyed. Rumors of the secret meeting spread, sparking debates and dissent among humanity's leaders. Some saw Sarah as a traitor, her willingness to engage with the enemy a betrayal of their struggle. Others hailed her as a visionary, a leader willing to take risks for the greater good. For Sarah, the weight of their expectations was a constant burden. She had always been a fighter, a pilot who lived for the thrill of the battlefield. But now, she was something more, a symbol of hope and a bridge between two worlds. One night, as she stood on the observation deck of the carrier, staring out at the endless expanse of stars, Gregor joined her. He didn't say anything at first, his presence a quiet comfort as they both watched the void. "You did good today," he said finally. "Whether they want to admit it or not, you're giving people a reason to believe this war can end. Sarah didn't respond immediately, her gaze distant. "I just hope I'm doing the right thing," she said softly. "Because if I'm wrong—" "You're not wrong," Gregor interrupted. "I followed you into hell and back, Sarah, and I'd do it again in a heartbeat, because I know you're fighting for something worth believing in." Sarah turned to him, her expression a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. "Thanks, Gregor," she said. "That means more than you know." As they stood together, the stars shimmering in the vastness of space, Sarah felt a renewed sense of purpose. The road ahead would be long and fraught with challenges, but she was ready to face it one battle at a time. Far away, aboard the Zevran flagship, Virak stood in his private quarters, his gaze fixed on a holographic image of the Ghost Squadron. For the first time in his long career, he felt something he couldn't quite name, a mix of admiration, respect, and perhaps even hope. The humans were unlike any enemy he had ever faced, and though they were divided by language, culture, and history, he couldn't shake the feeling that their destinies were intertwined. As he deactivated the hologram, Virak made a silent vow to find a way to end this war, not with bloodshed, but with understanding. Because in the heart of battle, he had seen something extraordinary, and it had changed him forever. Months turned into years, and the war that had once seemed endless began to shift in ways no one could have predicted. The tentative truce negotiated between Sarah and Virak grew stronger, fueled by a shared understanding of the cost of conflict. Both sides continued to prepare for the worst, but a fragile thread of hope wove its way through the chaos. The Ghost Squadron remained on the front lines, their presence a symbol of humanity's resilience. Sarah led her team with unwavering determination, her leadership tested time and again as new challenges arose. But through it all, she never lost sight of the vision that had driven her to negotiate with the enemy, a future where humanity could thrive without the shadow of war. On the Zevran side, Virak faced his own trials. His decision to pursue peace was met with resistance from factions within the Armada, their pride and tradition blinding them to the possibility of change. But Virak's resolve never wavered. He had seen what the humans were capable of, and he knew that continued conflict would only lead to mutual destruction. The turning point came during a joint mission to neutralize a rogue faction threatening both sides. The faction, a splinter group of Zevran extremists, had acquired a doomsday weapon capable of annihilating entire planets. It was a threat neither side could ignore, forcing an unlikely alliance between the Ghost Squadron and a Zevran strike team. The mission was fraught with tension, the weight of history hanging heavy over every interaction. But as the two groups worked together, a mutual respect began to take root. Human and Zevran soldiers fought side by side, their shared goal binding them in a way that transcended their differences. Sarah and Virak led the charge, their partnership a testament to the power of trust. They coordinated their forces with surgical precision, their combined tactics overwhelming the rogue faction's defenses. In the end, the weapon was destroyed and the splinter group was neutralized. The success of the mission sent shockwaves through both sides. For the first time, humanity and the Zevran had fought as allies rather than enemies. It was a glimpse of what could be, a future defined not by division but by unity. In the aftermath, the truce was formalized into a lasting peace agreement. Delegates from Earth and the Zevran Armada gathered to sign the accord, their actions paving the way for a new era of cooperation. The ceremony was broadcast across the galaxy, a beacon of hope for worlds that had long been mired in conflict. Sarah and Virak stood side by side as the agreement was finalized, their shared journey a reminder of how far they had come. For Sarah, it was a moment of quiet triumph, a validation of the risks she had taken and the sacrifices she had made. For Virak, it was a step toward redemption, a chance to build a legacy defined not by conquest, but by reconciliation. Years later, the story of the Ghost Squadron and the Zevran truce became a cornerstone of interstellar history. It was taught in schools, its lessons shaping the leaders of tomorrow. And while the scars of war remained, they were tempered by the knowledge that even the deepest wounds could heal. Sarah retired from active duty, her legacy secure. She spent her days mentoring the next generation of pilots, her stories inspiring countless young men and women to take to the skies. She often thought of Virak, their unlikely partnership, a source of pride and reflection. Though they came from different worlds, their shared vision had changed the galaxy. On the Zevran homeworld, Virak became a statesman, his voice a guiding force in the new era of peace. He worked tirelessly to bridge the divide between his people and humanity, his efforts ensuring that the accord endured. And while he rarely spoke of his time as a commander, those who knew him understood the depth of his transformation. In the quiet moments, both Sarah and Virak found solace in the stars. They were a reminder of the vastness of the universe and of the connections that bound them together. And as they looked to the heavens, they knew that their journey, though fraught with hardship, had been worth every step. The galaxy remembered them not as warriors, but as visionaries, and their legacy endured, a testament to the power of hope, resilience, and the belief that even in the darkest of times, humanity, and all those who stood with it, could rise. As the stars stretched endlessly across the sky, their light seemed to whisper a timeless truth. In the heart of battle, we found our strength. In the courage to change, we found our future. As the years turned into decades, the Accord became more than just a treaty. It became the foundation for an unprecedented era of interstellar cooperation. Humanity and the Zevran Armada led the charge, their partnership inspiring other species to join what became known as the Unity Alliance. Together, they formed a coalition dedicated to peace, exploration, and the preservation of life across the galaxy. Sarah's story, and that of the Ghost Squadron, was immortalized in countless ways, through songs, holographic dramas, and historical archives. But Sarah herself shied away from the limelight, preferring the quiet satisfaction of seeing her work make a difference. She dedicated her later years to mentoring young leaders, her wisdom shaping the minds of those who would carry the torch of peace forward. One of her most promising mentors was a young diplomat named Kayla Venn, a human-Zevran hybrid whose very existence was a symbol of the Accord's success. Kayla embodied the hope and unity that Sarah and Virak had fought for, her charisma and insight making her a rising star in the Alliance. Sarah, Kayla said one day, her tone filled with reverence, "You've done so much for the galaxy. How do you know when it's time to let go?" Sarah smiled, her eyes twinkling with a mix of pride and amusement. "You never really let go," she said. "You just pass the baton and trust that the next generation will keep running." And Kayla, "I trust you more than you know." Meanwhile, Virak found himself navigating a new kind of battlefield, the political arena. As a senior ambassador for the Alliance, he used his experience and reputation to advocate for cooperation and understanding. His speeches, once filled with the rhetoric of war, now spoke of unity and the strength found in diversity. One of his most poignant moments came during a memorial ceremony on Earth, where he stood before a crowd of thousands to honor the lives lost during the war. As he spoke, his voice steady but tinged with emotion, he reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. "We were enemies once," he said, his crimson eyes scanning the crowd. "But today we stand as allies. Let us not forget the lessons of our past. Let us remember that true strength is not found in the power to destroy, but in the courage to build." Together, the crowd erupted into applause, their voices a symphony of hope. Virak's words resonated across the galaxy, their impact a reminder of how far they had come. The garden on Earth where the first peace monument had been erected grew into a sprawling sanctuary, its paths lined with plaques commemorating milestones in the Alliance's history. Families visited to teach their children about the sacrifices made and the victories won, their laughter mingling with the rustle of the trees. One day, as the sun set over the garden, a young boy approached the monument at its center. His wide eyes reflected the golden light as he read the inscription, "In the heart of battle, we found our strength. In the courage to change, we found our future." The boy turned to his father, his expression curious. "Did they really change the galaxy, Dad?" he asked. His father smiled, his gaze distant. "They didn't just change the galaxy," he said. "They gave us a reason to believe in something greater. And that's something we must never forget." Far away, on the stellar nexus, a new generation of leaders gathered in the Unity Forum, their voices echoing through the Grand Chamber. They debated policies, proposed initiatives, and charted the course for the Alliance's future. Among them was Kayla Venn, her presence a testament to the legacy of those who had come before her. As the discussions unfolded, Kayla found herself glancing at a holographic display of Sarah and Virak, their images forever etched into the fabric of history. She felt a swell of gratitude and determination, her resolve steeling as she prepared to address the assembly. "Honored delegates," she began, her voice steady and clear, "we stand here today because of those who dared to imagine a better world. Let us honor their legacy by continuing their work, by striving for a future where every voice is heard and every life is valued." Her words were met with a standing ovation, the sound a testament to the enduring power of the vision that Sarah and Virak had shared. And so, the story of the Ghost Squadron and the Zevran Truce became more than just a chapter in the annals of history. It became a beacon for generations to come, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always a path to the light. As the stars stretched endlessly across the galaxy, their light seemed to whisper a timeless truth: in unity, we rise. In hope, we endure. And in understanding, we find our future. In the centuries that followed, the Alliance flourished, expanding to include hundreds of worlds and countless species. Its founding principles, cooperation, respect, and the pursuit of knowledge, became a guiding light for civilizations across the galaxy. The Accord, once a fragile truce born of necessity, grew into a robust framework for peace that endured the test of time. The stellar nexus, originally a diplomatic hub, evolved into a cultural and scientific epicenter. Its halls were filled with ambassadors, scientists, and artists, their collaborations birthing innovations that transformed life across the stars. Among its many achievements was the creation of the Unity Archives, a vast repository of knowledge and history accessible to all. One of the most visited sections of the archives was dedicated to the Ghost Squadron. Holographic displays chronicled their battles, their sacrifices, and their triumphs. Visitors marveled at the courage and ingenuity of the pilots who had defied impossible odds, their legacy a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Sarah Klein's story, in particular, resonated with countless individuals. Her leadership, her willingness to take risks for the greater good, and her unwavering belief in the possibility of peace made her a symbol of hope. Statues of her likeness stood in cities across the galaxy, her name spoken with reverence. But Sarah herself remained a humble figure. In her later years, she chose a quiet life on a remote colony, far from the political and social spotlight. She tended a small garden, its flowers a blend of earth and Zevran flora, their vibrant colors a reflection of the unity she had fought to achieve. Occasionally, she received visitors, students, historians, and young leaders seeking her wisdom. She welcomed them with a warm smile, her words always filled with humility and encouragement. The galaxy doesn't need heroes, she told them. It needs people willing to make the hard choices, to take the first step toward understanding. That's what changes the world. On the Zevran homeworld, Virak's legacy also endured. His efforts to bridge the divide between his people and humanity transformed him into a revered figure, his name synonymous with wisdom and diplomacy. The academy he founded trained generations of Zevran leaders, its curriculum rooted in the lessons he had learned during the war. Virak's final years were spent on the Nexus, where he continued to serve as an advisor to the Alliance. He often found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him there, his thoughts turning to Sarah and the bond they had shared. Though they came from different worlds, their shared vision had united them in ways that transcended their differences. One day, as he stood on the Nexus's observation deck, gazing out at the stars, a young Zevran officer approached him. "Commander Virak," the officer said, her voice filled with awe. "I've studied your work, your efforts to bring peace to the galaxy. How did you find the strength to defy tradition, to choose a different path?" Virak turned to her, his expression thoughtful. "Strength comes not from the absence of fear," he said, "but from the courage to face it. And sometimes, the hardest battles are the ones we fight within ourselves." The officer nodded, her respect for him deepening. "Thank you, Commander," she said. "Your words mean more than you know." As the officer left, Virak's gaze returned to the stars. He thought of Sarah, of the Ghost Squadron, and of the countless lives that had been shaped by their actions. The galaxy was far from perfect, but it was a better place than it had been. And that, he knew, was enough. On Earth, the original garden where the Peace Monument stood remained a cherished sanctuary. Generations of families visited its paths, their laughter and stories a testament to the enduring legacy of the Ghost Squadron. The trees, now towering giants, seemed to whisper the lessons of the past, their roots intertwined in a living symbol of unity. A new plaque was added to the monument on the 100th anniversary of the Accord's signing. Its inscription read, "To those who dared to believe in a better world, and to those who carry their light forward. May we always remember the courage to rise, the strength to endure, and the wisdom to unite." The galaxy moved forward, its people striving to uphold the values that had brought them together. And though the faces of the past faded into history, their spirit endured, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there was always hope. As the stars stretched endlessly across the cosmos, their light seemed to carry a message for all who gazed upon them. In unity, we rise. In hope, we endure. And in understanding, we find our future.